Hola, ¿qué tal? Yo estoy muy bien. So we're going to move on to 14.1, Instruction 2, estar plus asking and answering questions. So I want to take a little bit of time with you as we get started in this first set here to review what we learned last week with the verbs estar and also compare and contrast it with ser. So remember from last week, we learned that there are two ways that the English verb to be is expressed in Spanish, with ser and with estar. We've already learned ser prior to last week, and we learned estar last week. All right, remember, we use the verb ser to identify a person and to say where he or she is from. So we learned back in the first couple of weeks of class things like de donde eres, soy de Indiana, de donde es Pedro, es de Florida. And we also learned earlier in the course that ser has other uses as well. It's used to describe what a person looks like, their appearance, and also a person's personality. All right, so soy alto y serio. All right, Juan es bajo y artístico. Ustedes son inteligentes y guapos. We had to make the S's on the end to make them agree. Sara y Maria son altas y tímidas. And again, look at those endings, the AS, because they have to agree in number and gender. All right. Well, to review ser, we know soy, eres, es, somos, sois, y son. Those are the forms we've been practicing to express I am, you are, he or she is, you are in the formal way, we are, all of you are, they are, and all of you are. All right. Well, then last week we learned that Spanish has a second verb that also means to be, all right? It means the exact same thing as ser when we conjugate it, I am, you are, but we only use the verb estar to say where something is located and to say how people feel. All right, I taught you a rhyme last week that's really important. How you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. So if you can always remember that rhyme, you'll be able to remember two of the really big uses of estar. Now, to recap last week even further, ser and estar, they both mean to be, but they're never used interchangeably. You can only use ser to describe where someone is from and what they're like, and you can only use estar to describe where something is located and how people feel. Now, there are other uses that we'll talk about more next semester, but for the time being, I want us just to kind of focus on the ones that we've been learning so far. All right? So we learned last week, estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, y están. And those accents really matter. They have to be there on the ones that require accents because otherwise those words will mean something else. And again, these, when you conjugate them, they mean the exact same thing as ser, but we have to remember they have different uses. All right? Now we know that we've been using the question ¿Cómo estás? Since our first week of class. Well, now we have a lot of different ways to respond to that because estar is used to describe how you feel. So usually every week I'll start my videos with ¿Cómo estás? Well, this is our great list of ways you can respond. So ¿Cómo estás? Estoy contento, estoy enfermo, estoy ocupado. All of these we learned last week. And again, this week are how we respond to ¿Cómo estás? Since that's a how you feel question. So let's try a little bit of practice here. Let's go back. We've learned how to answer yes or no questions. Yes or no questions are questions that require just a yes or a no answer. So for example, ¿miras la televisión todos los días? Well, we've learned to say, sí, miro la televisión todos los días, or no, no miro la televisión todos los días. All right, so moving on, ¿trabajas mucho? Once again, another yes or no question. Sí, trabajo mucho, or no, no trabajo mucho. Yes or no questions. ¿Habla Sara español? Sí, Sara habla español, or no, Sara no habla español. So when we have a yes or no question, we answer with a yes or a no, and that's how we've been practicing. Now, we can also use yes or no questions with the verb estar. So, ¿está feliz Juan? Is Juan happy? Sí, Juan está feliz, or no, Juan no está feliz. So just like we learned a couple of weeks ago, oftentimes Juan, the name, the subject will come at the very end in a question. When you answer, the subject, such as Juan, will come first. Let's try another one. ¿Está enferma Juana? Well, first off, why is the A there? Well, we're talking about Juana, and it has to agree. So is Juana sick? Another yes or no question. Sí, Juana está enferma. Or no, Juana no está enferma. So another example of how we can use estar with yes or no questions. ¿Cómo está Pedro? Well, now we see this is not a yes or no question because not every question is going to be a yes or no question. So, ¿Cómo está Pedro? How is Pedro? Well, we couldn't say sí or no. That wouldn't be logical. We've got to answer with information. So, ¿Cómo está Pedro? Pedro está nervioso. So, not necessarily everything is a yes or no question. ¿Cómo está María? Well, María está emocionada. That's how she's feeling right now. ¿Cómo están María y Sara? María y Sara están preocupadas. All right. So, and again, why is that the AS there? Well, we're talking about María y Sara, so two people, and they're both female, so we've got to make sure it agrees with number and gender. ¿Dónde están María y Sara? Están en la oficina. ¿Dónde estás? Well, estoy en el gimnasio. So remember, not everything will always be a yes or a no question. When they're not yes or no questions, we've got to answer in a way that will be logical to respond to them. So let's practice a little bit with ¿dónde está? All right, ¿dónde está is a really important question when you say, where is somebody or something? So we're going to talk today about a gato. Gato is the word for cat. So, ¿dónde está el gato? Well, let's take a look at this gato, and we're going to review some of our ways to describe where somebody or something is located. So, el gato está a la derecha de la caja. All right, so está is my conjugation degree with gato, and as I describe the gato's location, it's to the right of the box. So, está a la derecha de la caja. A la izquierda, if you remember from last week, is to the left of. So, el gato está a la izquierda de las cajas, to the boxes. ¿Dónde está el gato? Pues el gato está al lado del perro, all right, next to the perro, next to the dog. ¿Dónde está el gato? El gato está cerca del agua, all right, close to the water. ¿Dónde está el gato? El gato está debajo de la cama, so underneath. ¿Dónde está el gato? El gato grande está detrás del gato pequeño, so behind. ¿Dónde está el gato? El gato está dentro de la caja, inside the box. ¿Dónde está el gato? El gato está encima de la caja, on top of the box. ¿Dónde está el gato? El gato está lejos, far away, lejos de la cámara. Bien? So, when we use estar, it has so many uses for describing how you feel and where you are. And we've looked at a couple of different ways to use estar in this video with how you feel and where you are. Remember, as you use estar to describe how you feel, always make sure that your adjectives agree in number and gender. And we also have to remember that not everything will be a yes or no question. And when it's not a yes or no question, when we hear the words donde or cuando, we've got to provide some more information. So we're going to practice a little bit with what we saw in this video to see if we can make even more connections between what we learned previously and what we just learned in this video. Hasta luego. Ciao.